In the cold stretches of deep space far beyond the last human outpost, a planet sat silent, hidden behind swirling clouds of radiation and ancient debris fields. No species had ever successfully landed there, nor had anyone who approached it returned. The same those who survived spoke of confusion, madness, systems collapsing without cause, and voices that whispered warnings through the static of their ship's speakers. Over time this place gained a name whispered only in caution by the older races of the galaxy, a cursed world not to be touched, a place the Galactic Council had officially blacklisted centuries ago, and so it remained, forgotten by most, feared by all, left to float in its own mystery. But humans were still new to this part of the galaxy, eager to explore, hungry for something greater, and always too stubborn to listen to old warnings. The human ship named Endeavor was small compared to the enormous crafts of the elder species. It was not fancy, not rich in shielding, or guided by some super-intelligent AI. It was built with steel resolve, duct tape fixes, analog backups, and a crew that laughed in the face of danger. Its commander was Blake, a man whose name meant little to anyone yet, whose eyes held the kind of fire that came only from surviving the impossible more than once. As the Endeavor entered the quiet system, where the Forbidden's planet waited, hidden behind a belt of shattered moons, a message came through, sharp, loud, crackling with urgency. It was a broadcast from a Zalari ship, one of the ancient races, wise and cautious. The voice that filled Endeavor's control room spoke clearly. You must not proceed. This world is cursed. It drains the soul, confuses the mind. Nothing survives there. We turned away once and never looked back. Turn around now, before it takes you too. Blake sat in the captain's chair, arms crossed, listening to the words, while the crew waited in silence. The stars outside the viewport drifted slowly past, and the planet remained hidden in the fog of dust ahead. He leaned forward slightly, as if talking to an old friend, and spoke into the mic, his voice calm, steady, almost amused. Thanks for the concern, but we're already here. Might as well take a look. He ended the message with a coento, casual tone, then looked around at his crew. None of them seemed frightened. One of them grinned, another shook their head with disbelief. But no one raised objection. The sensors began to flicker. Moments later, minor readings fluctuated. Strange static appeared in the system logs, but the humans didn't panic. Instead, they pulled out notebooks, pens, hardwired scopes, and radio headsets. They had prepared for this very thing. Analog instruments immune to digital confusion. The navigator spoke while scanning the horizon ahead. Planet's gravity is like magnetic field, unstable atmosphere, unknown but breathable for short exposure. Blake nodded and gave the go-ahead to begin descent, as if entering a routine survey site, not a cursed world. Older than recorded time, the Endeavor pushed slowly through the dust belt. Ships in the outer systems watched from afar. Some alien commanders whispered to their crews, "Fools, let them be lost like the others." But the humans didn't know fear the way others did. They knew risk, they respected it, but they never let it stop them. Curiosity was stronger in them than caution, sometimes stronger than sense itself. As they broke through the upper layer of clouds, the planet below revealed itself a dark green and black surface, cracked with deep canyons, ridges that formed strange patterns, and structures that rose like teeth from the ground, symmetrical, too perfect to be natural. AI assistant on the ship had already shut itself off long before entering the atmosphere, unable to process the strange inputs. The humans didn't mind. Blake and the others had trained without relying on it for moments like this. Soon they hovered just above a wide clearing near what looked like the remains of a landing site. Old half-buried metal fragments and scorched stone, as if another ship had tried to land centuries ago and failed. Another message came through, not from the Zalari this time, but from the Council itself. All vessels are to avoid contact with the designated Forbidden's world. Continued presence may trigger emergency sanctions. Withdraw immediately. Blake read the message out loud, then tore off the printout from the backup transmitter and stuffed it in his pocket. The crew didn't even ask. For a decision, they were already preparing suits, checking oxygen levels, inspecting manual tools, and setting coordinates for ground entry. Silence of the planet seemed almost too heavy, pressing against the ship like a warning. Blake stood at the top of the ramp, his boots ready to touch the surface. He looked at the strange patterns on the hills in the distance, and the massive shadows that moved despite the windless air. He turned back to the crew behind him, a mix of engineers, medics, explorers, people who had signed up not just for the paycheck, but for something deeper, something primal. They say this place makes machines go crazy, makes minds break apart, he said. But we're not machines, and we're not going to break. If there's something here that scares the rest of the galaxy, then maybe, just maybe, it's exactly what we need to find. With that, he stepped down the ramp, boots landing on the ancient soil that hadn't known life in a long time. In orbit, the watching alien ships turned away, some with sadness, some with disgust, others with fear, but none of them understood what drove humans to go forward. When the whole universe shouted to stop, the ground team began to move forward across the cracked plains toward the nearest structure that rose like a blade from the earth, sharp, tall, humming faintly beneath their feet, a low pulse like the heartbeat of something that had been sleeping for ages. The humans felt it, not with fear, but with excitement, their eyes filled with wonder, their movements careful, yet determined. While in the stars above, the name of humanity began to change in whispers and war councils. Reckless, not fools, but something else entirely, something dangerous, something brave. And so the real mission began. The wind across the strange world carried no scent, no sound, and no sign of life, yet it moved slowly, brushing over the cracked stones and jagged hills like a whisper too old to be understood. The human boots pressing into the dark soil left the first new footprints in what might have been 1,000,000 years or more above them. The ship Endeavor hovered, silent, steady, its manual systems keeping it afloat as the digital ones shut themselves down, unable to comprehend the strange signals that pulsed from the ground below. Commander Blake led the way across the open plain toward the towering spire that pierced the sky like a broken spear. The surface of the spire shimmered with something that looked like metal but shifted when seen from different angles. The team followed closely behind, eyes scanning the area, weapons at their sides, but lowered tools strapped across their back, sensors in their hands, old models, but reliable because nothing new seemed to work properly. Here, every few steps they stopped, tested the ground, measured the air, marked their path. It was quiet, too quiet, and yet it wasn't empty. There was something under the surface, something they couldn't hear with ears or record with machines. It was more like a feeling, like the ground itself was aware of them, watching, judging. Blake paused near the base of the spire and ran his gloved hand across the material. It was cold, smooth, alive in a way that made no sense as he touched it. The ground beneath them gave off a soft vibration, and then a series of lights blinked on in a ring around the tower, faint and slow, as if waking from a long sleep. The crew stepped back instinctively, but Blake stood his ground. Back on the Endeavor, the crew aboard watched the readings flicker with growing confusion. Radiation levels were normal, gravity remained stable, but strange symbols were beginning to appear on their analog monitors, shapes and patterns not seen in any known language, shifting like they were alive. The technician tried to sketch them by hand, but the moment he looked away, they changed positions on the surface. Blake's team moved inside a crack at the base of the spire, wide enough for two to walk side by side. The tunnel was not natural, the walls smooth, lined with the same strange shimmering material. The lights along the path pulsed slowly, matching the rhythm of a heartbeat. Not human, not mechanical, something in between. Inside the tunnel, the crew walked for several minutes in silence until they reached a chamber wide and circular, with a high ceiling covered in moving patterns like constellations. They did not recognize at the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it a sphere of glass or crystal floating a few inches above the surface, spinning slowly and humming softly. Blake stepped closer, but stopped as a sudden wave of dizziness hit him. Then the humming grew louder, not from the sphere, but from inside their minds. Memories began to flash, smells From childhood voices of people long gone, even the taste of food from years ago. The crew stumbled, some falling to their knees, others clutching their heads. But Blake stood straight, his eyes wide-focused. Breathing slow, he pulled a small music player from his pocket, an old device not digital, powered by a winding mechanism. He turned it on, and a soft melody filled the air, something simple, a piano tune his mother once played. Music cut through the noise, the visions faded, the dizziness lessened. One by one the others stood again, regaining their senses, breathing hard but unbroken. Blake nodded toward the sphere and motioned the engineer forward. The man carefully examined it, then reached out with a sensor tool that sparked and failed immediately. He cursed under his breath and instead used a small mirror to reflect the light from the sphere onto a portable slate. The light revealed symbols, ancient lines and curves forming something close to coordinates or instructions. They photographed it, sketched it, backed up every detail in 3 separate methods, because nothing digital could be trusted here. Back outside the tunnel, the wind had stopped completely. The sky above had turned slightly darker, though the sun remained in place. Time felt like it had slowed down, as if the planet was bending it slightly, not enough to break, only enough to disorient. From orbit, the alien vessels watching began to record the human signals. With rising concern, the council received updates in real time, and arguments broke out in multiple languages, some saying the humans were mad, others saying they were too brave for their own good. But one voice among the council whispered, "Perhaps they are not fools. Perhaps they are what this galaxy has been waiting for." On the planet, Blake gave the order to split into 2 teams. One would stay near the spire, continue recording and collecting data. The other would move toward the second structure visible in the distance, another tower, though shorter and tilted like it had once moved, but had been frozen mid-notionas. The second team approached the structure. The air grew heavier, colors began to fade slightly. The world seemed less real, more like a dream. The structure itself pulsed slowly, like it breathed. Shadows moved across the surface, but there was no light to cast them inside. They found a staircase leading down, carved into the stone. No railings, no lights, just a path into the dark, and at the bottom, a door not locked, not hidden, just waiting. They opened it and found a chamber much like the first, but larger, filled with objects floating in place, small devices, broken tools, bones, not human but humanoid, and some were fused into the walls as if pulled by the structure and absorbed long ago. The team stepped back, unsure. One of them reached for a scanner, which burst in his hand, sparks flying across the room. But there was no explosion, no fire, only a soft voice whispering from the walls, a language they could not translate, but somehow understood. "You are not like the others." Back on the surface, Blake felt a pull, a sudden sense of awareness. Something was watching them, not with eyes, but with thought. Something that had been silent for a long time, now awakened by human presence. He looked up at the sky, then down at the earth, then at the strange spires rising from the planet, and he smiled. He didn't know exactly what they had found, not yet, but he knew one thing for sure: this place had been waiting, and humans were the ones who had answered. The wind never returned, but something else had started to rise around them. Not a sound, not a presence, but a pressure deep in the chest, like a mountain pressing from above. The sky still hung silent, but the colors of the world had shifted slightly. What was once gray now shimmered with blue. What was once green now leaned into gold, and the strange light from the twin suns above seemed to bend around the towers. The crew could feel it, even those back on the Endeavor, watching through their analog scopes and sketching details by hand. They all felt the same thing. The ruins called to them. Blake stood at the edge of a new path, revealed by a soft tremor in the ground. A line of stones had risen just enough to be seen, leading toward a circular structure half buried in the distance. The soil around it was dry, cracked, etched with the same symbols they had seen inside the towers. None of them matched any known language, not human, not alien, not even artificial. He signaled to the others, and they began to move. The air grew warmer with each step, as if the planet itself was aware of their direction. Watching adjusting, preparing the structure ahead was shaped like a dome, part of it broken with sharp edges that looked more like melted stone than shattered metal. Inside the dome was darkness deep and complete. Not even the high beam torches they carried could fully push it away, but they entered anyway, one by one, careful, quiet, eyes wide, but not fearful. Inside the dome, the walls curved inward, covered with carvings, patterns that seemed to shift when not being looked at directly. The deeper they moved, the less the air felt like normal atmosphere, and more like the inside of something living, as if they were walking into the body of a giant ancient creature resting beneath the crust of the planet. At the center of the chamber stood another pedestal, this one larger, more complex. It held no sphere this time, but instead a vertical frame. Inside it, a suspended cube of rotating metal plates, shifting endlessly in impossible ways. No gears, no visible source of motion. It just moved and moved like a puzzle trying to solve itself. One of the engineers reached out with gloved fingers, touched one of the plates, and instantly dropped to his knees, eyes wide, breathing fast. He muttered numbers, random sequences at first, but then patterns began to form, sequences from Earth mathematics equations from old physics textbooks, and then new ones, unknown, unrecorded. Blake knelt beside him, rested a hand on his shoulder, spoke softly, told him to breathe, told him to write it down, and the man did, still shaking, but focused, scribbling wildly across a physical notebook, using a pencil, because nothing else worked. Something had triggered the structure. It lit up slowly with pulses across the ceiling, symbols, glowing soft yellow, moving in a slow circle, as if reacting to the presence of human minds. Back on the Endeavor, the same symbols appeared across the scratched plastic screen of a sensor array, symbols etched into the dust on the exterior hull, symbols that hadn't been there minutes before. The technician on board grabbed a camera, tried to photograph it, but the image came out blank. Even on film, meanwhile, in the alien council stations far beyond the system, multiple observation points began to receive strange echoes from the Forbidden's planet. Not distress calls, not interference, but layers of data mixed with harmonic frequencies they did not understand. In the dome below, Blake and the crew stood as the cube floated higher, now spinning faster, revealing a hollow inside, and within it something even more ancient, a crystal not of any known form, shaped like a spiral inside a cube with a small heartbeat pulsing once every few seconds. The medic in the team moved forward slowly, scanning manually, nothing digital, and she confirmed it was emitting some form of energy, not dangerous, not radioactive, but alive, like the planet itself was using this to breathe, to think, to dream. Then the whispers returned, low voices, not in the ears but in the back of the mind, not words but intent, and the message was simple. You stayed. The crew felt it together, their eyes met. No one needed to speak, they all heard the same thing, and for a moment it felt like the ground around them softened, like the planet itself approved. Walls around them began to shift slightly, new paths opening, one leading downward deeper into the earth. Blake looked at the engineer, who had now stopped shaking, and nodded. He stood tall again, stronger, changed in some way. They moved together into the new corridor, narrow, smooth, without light, but still visible because the walls themselves glowed faintly blue. The corridor led to another chamber, this one not shaped like the others. It was circular, with a raised platform and hundreds of seats, carved from the stone itself, arranged in tiers, like an ancient council chamber, but far older than any memory at. The center of the room was a column, and above it a projection, not holographic, not light, but something beyond a vision of a galaxy. Not the current one, but perhaps a different version, or a memory of one. Stars arranged differently, nebulae that no longer existed, in pathways between them drawn in light. And then the scene shifted, now showing the same galaxy, but cracked, broken. Several stars blinking out, and then a single line of light moving across the galaxy, like a thread of life weaving between the chaos. It stopped at a small star system on the edge, a blue planet, one moon, and then it faded. Again Blake whispered, "It's us." One of the scientists stepped forward, looked closer, his voice shaking, not from fear but wonder. "It's a map Of a collapse or reset a cycle. Maybe this place it was built to watch or to record, or to wait for the right species to come and seethe. Column pulsed again this time, releasing another sequence of symbols onto the ground, arranged like a spiral, the center pointing downward toward the core of the planet. Blake stared at it, then at the crew. "We go deeper," he said. Not one of them refused back. On the surface, storms began to gather, clouds forming in strange circular patterns above the towers. But no lightning, no rain, just motion. The alien observers continued to watch, continued to doubt, continued to wonder. Because the humans had done what no other species had even tried. They had listened to the warnings and walked into the storm anyway, and the planet had started to respond. The path that led downward was not made of stone or metal. It felt more like memory, solid yet soft beneath their boots. It glowed faintly with every step, as if acknowledging their presence. The deeper they went, the more the planet seemed to breathe. The air became heavier, but not in a way that made it hard to move. Instead, it felt like walking through something alive, through thoughts and feelings buried so deep that no machine could detect them. Blake led the team in silence, his eyes fixed forward, his mind focused on every vibration, every color shift in the walls. They passed shapes, moved along the surface like waves beneath thin ice, but always vanished the moment anyone tried to touch them. The crew followed without hesitation, each member holding onto their tools, not because they needed them, but because it reminded them who they were. Explorers, not invaders. They reached a chamber far below the surface, larger than any before, shaped like an enormous sphere, with no floor, no ceiling, only curved walls that seemed to extend into infinity. Suspended in the center of this place was a structure unlike anything they had seen. It was not a machine, not a building. It was something in between. It pulsed slowly, as if alive, made from layers of light and crystal and memory. It did not glow, it radiated a feeling. They stepped into the chamber, onto a narrow bridge that led directly to the heart of the construct. Around them floated fragments of objects. Some looked like tools, others like parts of ships. All old, all worn, some clearly not human, but none of it moved. It was as if time itself had frozen within this room. Blake moved toward the center, and the structure began to shift, unfolding like a flower, revealing something at its core. A figure, not a person, not a creature, but something made from light and shadow, tall with no face, but presence enough to fill the entire space. It stood motionless, waiting, not aggressive, not afraid, just aware. The crew stood still, unsure of what they were seeing, but not running, not backing away. Instead, they waited, because something about this presence felt familiar, not in appearance, but in purpose. The figure raised a famized hand, or what looked like one, and suddenly the room filled with vision, not noise, not images, but understanding. They saw a galaxy, young, bright, full of life. Then a darkness creeping through it, not evil, not a monster, but entropy, slow decay, civilizations rising and falling one after another, none lasting, none remembering. Then came builders, ones who tried to stop the decay, who created worlds like this one, guardians of memory and test grounds for those who might carry the light forward. Most species failed the test. They ran or fought or ignored the signs, but a few made it this far, and still they could not face the truth. But now humanity had arrived, not the most advanced, not the strongest, but different. They questioned, they dared, they stepped forward. Even when the stars said stop, the vision faded, and the figure looked at Blake, though it had no eyes, and Blake stepped forward without speaking. He reached toward the center of the construct, and it responded, splitting open to reveal a small object floating above a platform. It was no bigger than a stone, yet it pulsed with power, raw, ancient, untamed. Picked it up, and for a moment, everything stopped. No wind, no thought, no time, just silence. Then the chamber began to move, walls shifting, symbols appearing across every surface. The crew watched as new paths opened, spirals leading outward and upward, connecting the core to the towers. Above, the planet was changing. Back on the surface, the towers began to hum, sending waves through the Ground the sky shifted, the clouds above, spiraling faster, stars seemed to flicker even in the daylight aboard the Endeavor. The systems began to activate, not from human input, but from the planet itself, screens lit with information too fast to read. Graphs, numbers, images all at once. The technician called out to the bridge hands flying across the analog controls, trying to keep up. Blake's voice came through the radio, steady, calm. He said, "We found something, a key, maybe a code, it unlocked something. And now it's waking up alien." Observers in distant sectors watched the signals coming from the planet. They had never seen anything like it, not in thousands of years of watching this system. The council chambers erupted in chaos. Some demanded immediate quarantine. Others suggested sending envoys, but no one could deny it. The humans had done what no other had dared. They had touched the core and survived. Deep below the surface, Blake turned to the crew and spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "We're not done this thing, this world. It's more than a tomb. It's a library, a warning, a beginning. We've started something, and we need to see it through." They moved together back through the spirals, following the paths, newly revealed doors that had been hidden, now open, lights guiding them back toward the surface. But the world had shifted, no longer looked like the one they had entered. The terrain had changed, patterns moved across the soil. Plants that had not existed before began to bloom, tall silver stalks with glowing petals reaching toward the sky. The wind returned, carrying a sound like music, soft, low, steady. The planet was singing. Endeavor opened its hatch as the team approached, their suits covered in dust, their faces marked with wonder and exhaustion. The crew inside helped them aboard, eyes wide at the changes outside. The sky had turned a deeper blue, the towers pulsing gently like beacons. Blake stood at the window, watching the landscape transform, the object still in his hand glowing softly. It didn't feel heavy, not like a weapon or a burden. It felt like a message, a responsibility. "We woke it up," he said softly, "to no one in particular, and it welcomed us back in orbit." Alien ships recorded every movement, every sound, and still could not understand what had happened. This place had broken minds, drained power, shattered fleets, and yet the humans walked through it as if it were made for them. And maybe it was. For the first time in generations, the council remained silent, because now they were no longer sure who they should fear more, the sleeping power of the old worlds, or the rising fire of the new. And in that silence, the stars watched as humanity took its first step into something far greater, the air above. The strange world shimmered with a light, not from the stars, not from any artificial source, but from the planet itself, as if something deep inside had awakened, and now pulsed outward through the atmosphere in waves of color and sound. The sky was no longer quiet. It echoed with a hum that seemed to rise from the soil and drift beyond the clouds, carried into the vacuum of space, where it reached the sensors of distant ships and the eyes of distant watchers who could only stare and wonder. What had changed inside the Endeavor? The crew gathered in the control room, watching the readings, watching the shifting images outside. Their hands rested on levers, switches, notebooks, paper maps, not because they feared failure, but because this was how they worked. This was how they stayed human in the face of the impossible. Blake stood at the main console, the artifact still in his grip, not glowing now, but warm, steady, pulsing like a heart, and he looked at it not with fear, but with a strange sense of responsibility, as if it had chosen him, or perhaps tested him, and now trusted him with something ancient, something forgotten by the stars. The technician on the bridge called out numbers, graphs, elevations, power levels that kept climbing. But there was no panic, no rush, only understanding. Something bigger was unfolding, and they were part of it. Far above, alien ships hovered just outside the gravity field, their captains silent, watching, trying to make sense of the impossible. This world that had broken everything now responded like a friend, like an old guardian shaking off the dust of centuries to greet its new guest. And in the council chambers across the stars, the silence held for longer than it ever had before. The Endeavor rose slowly from the surface, engines, low analog systems, guiding it carefully through the strange magnetic layers that had once bent other ships. into metal husks now parted, gently allowing the vessel to ascend like it belonged here, the planet. No longer pushed against them, it lifted them, supported them. As they reached orbit, the crew saw it clearly for the first time. The shape of the world had changed, not in form, but in energy. Vast rings of light now circled it like a signal, like a beacon, telling the galaxy that something had shifted, and all those watching felt it deep inside, whether they admitted it or not. The communications officer adjusted the signal relay, then turned to Blake, waiting for confirmation. Blake nodded once, then spoke into the system, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "This is Commander Blake of the human vessel Endeavor. The artifact is secured. The system is stable. The world is no longer dormant. Mission complete." He paused for a second before finishing his transmission with the same words he had said at the start. Only this time they carried more weight, more meaning. Aliens say retreat. Humans say bring it on. Signal reached every corner of space. It traveled through relays across systems into stations and ships where humans lived and worked and dreamed, and it landed with impact, not because of the words, but because of what they now meant. The galaxy had long known humans as newcomers, noisy, unpredictable, perhaps too curious, but now it began to see something else, a pattern, a truth beneath the chaos. Humanity did not turn away from danger. It did not bow before mystery. It faced the unknown with open eyes and steady hands. Back on the Endeavor, the crew gathered to examine the data. Collected images drawn by hand, equations recorded by memory, sequences of symbols now being compared across languages, across logic. They did not fully understand what they had activated, but they knew it was not a weapon. It was a door, and they had stepped through it. Blake walked through the corridors of the ship, slowly observing his team, seeing the tired faces, the worn suits, the dust still clinging to boots and gloves, and yet none of them looked beaten. None of them looked uncertain. They had walked through visions, faced silence that could crush thought, stood before something older than time, and they came back stronger. As the ship began its return course, distant outposts started to send messages. Not just questions, but invitations, alliances, proposals from species that had once ignored. Humanity now reached out, some out of fear, others out of awe, and a few out of something that almost looked like respect. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions. One faction argued for caution, another for containment. But there was no stopping what had begun, because it was not just about one mission or one planet. It was about the idea that humans had lit a torch in the dark and dared to walk forward, and in quiet corners of the galaxy, whispers began to spread of the planet that woke, for the ones who stayed, of the ancient systems that chose not the strongest or the smartest but the bold, and of the humans who entered a place where logic failed and said, "We will find a way." Stood at the viewport, watching the stars shift outside, watching the strange planet slowly vanish into the distance behind them. It no longer looked like a place of danger or death. It looked like memory, like promise. And he smiled, not because they had won something, but because they had begun something. Mission was over, but the journey was not, because now they carried something greater than data, greater than technology. They carried a truth that would change the stars, that courage mattered, that presence mattered, that humanity, when faced with the impossible, did not run, did not hide, did not retreat. They said, "Bring it on," and the universe had heard the end.